Before we begin, let me point out that lockpicking is illegal unless you own the lock that you're picking. So please, save yourself some hassle, and don't try to pick locks that don't belong to you. Now that that's out of the way with, let's look a little bit at the history of lockpicking. The earliest known locks are dated back about 4,000 years ago to ancient Egypt. They were made of wood, and the keys were about as long as your arm and vaguely resembled a hairbrush. In addition, the book of Nehemiah reports that the gates of Jerusalem had locks on them. So evidently locks were a pretty common feature in ancient times. Unfortunately, from the time of the Roman Empire up through the Middle Ages, locksmithing was pretty much stagnant. There was only one type of lock in use, the warded lock, and while there was some variation within that family, the differences were mostly cosmetic. It wasn't until the late 18th and early 19th centuries that people decided the lock needed a complete redesign. Men like Joseph Rama and Robert Barron were among the pioneers of this movement. In 1858, Linus Yale Sr. and his son Linus Yale Jr. reinvented an ancient Egyptian piece of technology. It's what we now call the pin tumbler lock. Chances are it's what's on your front door right now. Now we still have a problem. None of these locks are pick-proof. An experienced lockpicker can usually open them in half an hour or less. So in 1967, a small startup named Medico decided to remedy that situation. It released its first high-security lock. Since then, Medico has grown to a large, successful corporation, and its name is virtually synonymous with high-security locks. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to get a hold of any Medico locks, but I did find this other high-security lock, so we'll have to see if we can't get that open instead. Okay, so that settles it for the history part. Now the part that you've been waiting for, how to actually pick these locks that we've been talking about. Let's start off easy, with the warded lock. Warded locks are designed to prevent a wrong key from turning. A blank key can't turn past the obstructions, or wards, shown in yellow. If we cut notches in the key at the right places, though, it will pass the wards and open the lock. However, if we put the same key in a different lock with differently arranged wards, it won't open it. The solution then is to simply file down the length of the key, creating a skeleton key or pass key, which will then open most locks of that design. So that's the warded lock. Now let's take a look at the other lock that I showed you, the pin tumbler lock, the kind that most people have on their front door. Pin tumbler locks are designed to only open if the right key is inserted. However, there is one important weakness which allows it to be picked: tolerances. The parts for a lock can't be machined perfectly, but there is a small range of error which will allow the lock to still function smoothly. Unfortunately, this also means the tolerances can be exploited to allow for the lock to be picked. The holes in which the pins slide up and down are not perfectly aligned, so when the small cylinder or plug is turned, one of the pins will jam before the others. By feeling the pins with a pick, a lockpicker can determine which pin is jamming and push it up until the crack between the two pins reaches the shear line, the crack between the plug and the rest of the lock. Then the plug will give a little and another pin will jam. Then just repeat the process until all of the pins are unstuck. Alright, now let's take a look at this high security lock for a minute. It's what's known as a disc detainer lock, which means that rather than having wards or pins on the inside, it has a series of 7 discs. So let's see if we can pick it then.